Hey everyone, welcome back to the Shubham Compiled Tech channel. And in today's video, we are going to practically learn about HTML forms, form elements, and different input types which are all related to each other. Now, forms are very important because they allow users to interact with websites by entering data. So, let's start by asking a simple question: what exactly is an HTML form? And the answer is that an HTML form is used to collect user input data, and the user input data is most often sent to a server for processing. Examples of HTML forms include login forms, registration forms, contact forms, and etc. Now, how exactly do we create an HTML form? We create the HTML form by using the form element that is used to create an HTML form for user input. So if we go to our Visual Studio Code here and let's write our form element here. The form element is a container for different types of input elements such as text fields, checkboxes, radio buttons, and so on. We will talk about them in a moment. Now talking about HTML form elements, firstly we have the label element. So let's write our label element here. Now if we write our label element here, we can actually define a label for an input element. So let's write full name, and the label element defines a label for many form elements and is useful for screen readers users also, because the screen reader will read out the label when the user focuses on the input element such as a text field. The label element also helps users who have difficulty clicking on a very small regions such as radio buttons or checkboxes, because when the user clicks the text within the label element, it toggles the radio button or checkbox. Also, we have a for attribute for our label that should be equal to the ID attribute of the input element to bind them together. So for example, let's write a input type text here. So input type equals text and close it. And if we give a id attribute to our input tag here, let's just say name here, and inside the label for attribute let's write the name here. So let's save it and open it in the web browser. We can see that our label and input type text is visible now. If we click on our label here, we can see that we are focusing on the input type text here. That's what the label for attribute is used for, which binds a label and input element together. Next, we have the input element, which is the most used form element. An input element can be displayed in many ways depending on the type attribute. For example, if we go to a Visual Studio Code, we have a type attribute of text here that displays a single line text input field. But if we change it to radio here and save it and open the file in the web browser here and refresh the page, we can see that it displays a radio button for selecting one of many choices. Currently there are only one choices, but we can have multiple choices to select any one of them. Then also we have an input type equals to submit. So let's write submit here and let's just save it and refresh our web page here. We can see that it displays a submit button for submitting the form. And there are many more input types in the HTML here. Then we have the select and option HTML form elements. The select element defines a drop-down list and the option element defines an option that can be selected respectively. They are also linked to each other. So if we go to our Visual Studio Code here and let's write a PR element here to introduce a line break. Let's actually add two of them. And below this, let's actually write a new label here for our select and option element. So if we write label and let's add a for here also. And let's just write a country inside the for attribute. And if we now close it and let's write country here also in capital, and below this let's actually write our select element here and let's actually give it a id of country that we have defined in the label for attribute. And inside our select element we write our option element here to define the option, selecting many options for the select element. So we write, let's actually write select country here, country, and the first option will be displayed as the default for selecting the values, and we define a value attribute to our option element to define its value. Let's actually add empty space here for no value, and let's write another option element here, and let's provide it a value of India, and let's write India in capital here also, or I should say in title case. Then we can write another option and value as, let's just say, US, and write United States here, and let's write one more option here with value of Australia and call it Australia, and let's save it and open it in the web browser here. So if we go to our file here and refresh the page, we can see that our country label is here and our select and option HTML form elements are also here, which represents a list of selections. So first we have defined the select country as default value, which has no value in the HTML form. Then we have India, United States and Australia. So we can select any of the countries here. Let's just select India here. Now by default the first item in the drop down list is selected, and to define a pre-selected option we add the attribute selected to the option. So if we write selected here to United States, let's just say selected, and if we now save and refresh our web page here, we can see that the United States is selected by default. So we can also do that. Then we also have a size attribute to specify the number of visible values. So if we say size here and let's write inside 2 here, and if we save and refresh our web page here, we can see that now the size has been changed from 1 to 2 here, and we can select any one of them. Also we can use the multiple attribute to allow the user to select more than one value. So if we say here multiple, and if we now save and refresh our page here, now we can select multiple values by holding down the control key and clicking the mouse button one here. So this was about the select and option element. Then next we have the text area element, which defines a multi-line text input or a text area. So if we go to our Visual Studio Code here and let's write another label for our text area element here. So let's write label, and below this let's write a message text here, and let's just say for attribute here, and let's also write a message here, and below this let's write our text area element here, and let's just pass the id as message to bind the label and the text area, and inside it we don't write anything. And let's actually add a line break here also by adding the br element, and let's actually add two of them for better visualization. And if we now save and open the file in the web browser, we can see that, let's refresh here, we can see that our text area is represented here and our label is also represented here. Also we have the rows and calls attribute to specify the visible number of lines in a text area and the visible width of a text area respectively. So if we write here rows, so rows equals, let's write 5, and calls as, let's write 15. So if we now save and refresh our web page here, you can see that our height and width of text area is now changed. So that's what we can do with rows and columns in the text area form element. We can also provide a placeholder text to display to the user using the placeholder attribute. So let's write placeholder here, and let's just say enter your message here, and let's actually add 3 dots here, and let's save it and refresh our web page here. We can see that we have a placeholder text here that just says enter your message here. So that's what we can do with our text area here. Next we have the button element that simply defines a button. So let's go to our Visual Studio Code here, and let's add a line break here by adding br element 2 times, and below this let's write a button here, and let's close it, and inside it let's write something like click me, and let's just save it and open it in the web browser. So if we refresh our page, we can see that our button is displayed here that just says click me, and if we click on it, nothing will happen because we have not provided any JavaScript code to it. Also we have the type attribute in the button element that changes the behavior of the button. such as a simple button which do something like such as to display an alert using JavaScript code, or a submit button that just submits the HTML form. So if we write some JavaScript code here, so let's write inside our head. So let's write a script tag here, and let's write a function here that just say greet here. So let's just write in small letters and greet here, and inside it let's write our alert function here that just say hello world, and let's add a semicolon here and let's save it. And inside button element we should first write the type attribute which is a button, but we can also have the type equals submit which just submits the form here, but for now let's just keep it to the button here. And let's also add a on click event here, so we can define on click, and inside it we can write our greet function here inside on click. So if we now save and refresh our web page here, and if we now click on it, we can see that our alert is shown here with text as hello world. So this was an example of button and type attribute of button element. Next we have the field set and legend elements, which are also linked to each other. The field set element is used to group related data in a form, and the legend element on the other hand defines a caption for the field set element. So for example, let's go to our Visual Studio Code here, and if we cover our labels and form elements with field set here, so let's just cut the closing tag from here to bottom of the button element here, and let's just format the code correctly here, and let's just add a legend element here to define the caption for our user form. So let's actually write user data here. So if we now save it and open the file in our web browser here, so let's refresh the page, so we can see that our labels and form elements are now inside a box here that is represented by the field set and the legend as caption as user data. So this was an example of field set and legend element. Next we have the HTML input types that we have said earlier to talk in depth later. So let's start. The HTML provides different input types for different kinds of data. Firstly, we have the input type text that simply defines a single line text input field in the web page. So if we go to our Visual Studio Code here, and let's just remove all of it from here, and let's write legend as input types, and below this let's write our input element here, and let's just provide a type of text here, and we can then self close it. And if we now save it and refresh our web page here, we can now see that we have input types as field set legend and in single line text input field. Also we can have a placeholder attribute just like the text area element attribute. We can write our placeholder text here also. So let's just write enter your name. So if we now save it and refresh our web page here, we can see that we now have a placeholder text for our input field. And one more thing to note here is that if we don't specify the type attribute on the input field, the default is considered as text. So make sure to make a note of it also. Next we have the input type as password, which simply defines a password field, and the characters in password field are marks that is shown as asterisks or circles. So if we go to our Visual Studio Code here, and let's write a label for it for better visualization. So let's write a label here called password and define a for attribute here. Let's just say password here also, and below this let's write our input element with type as password, and also write a placeholder attribute here that just say enter your password, and let's just also self close this, and also add a label for our name text field here. So let's also write label for attribute as name, and let's just close it and provide an id to our name field here. Let's just say name, and now if we save it and open the file in our web browser here and refresh the page, you can see that our password field is here but no label for our name here. We actually need to write a name here. So let's write name. If we now save it and refresh our page here, You can see that our name text field is here, which is input type text, and then a password field which is as input type text and which is marked with asterisks or circles. Let's also add a break line here below the input text field. So let's write a line break here, and if we now save it and refresh, the form is now better. Then we have the input type submit. So let's actually write here input type equals submit, and let's actually self close it. Now it defines a button for submitting form data to a form handler, and the form handler is typically a server page with a script for processing input data. The form handler is specified in the form's action attribute. So in the form element here, we can actually define our action here, which will be a server function that is used to process the user input data. But in our current example, we don't need to do that because we are just learning the HTML here. So if we now save it and open the web page in our browser and refresh the page, we can now see that our submit button is here by using the input type equals submit attribute. Next we have the input type radio, which defines a radio button. So if we go to our Visual Studio Code here, and let's just define a new label here, and let's define a for attribute for it, and let's call it mail, and let's write mail also. And after the input type password, let's also add an br element to introduce a line break here, and let's just copy the label for female also. So let's write female, and let's provide the female attribute also for label 4 attribute. So let's write female, and above the male label let's write gender here. So gender, and below the female label here let's write our input element here with type equals radio, and let's add it a id also for, let's say, male, and we can self close it. Let's also copy it for the female. So let's write female here, and it will be also type radio. So we now save and open the file in our web browser here and refresh the page. We can see that our gender is here with male and female radio buttons and labels, and if we click on any of radio buttons, we can see that it is a little bit buggy. Now why our both of radio buttons is selected instead of selecting for only one? Because we not have provided any name to our input fields. There should be only one unique name to both of our input fields. So let's write name equals, let's just say gender, and let's also define name for our female also. Let's also just say gender, and let's also add a br element below our female input radio button. So if we now save and refresh our web page here, we can see that now we can select only one of the two choices, that is male or female, and we can also select the radio button by clicking on the labels here. So this was an example of radio buttons. Then we have input type checkbox, which defines a checkbox. Checkboxes lets a user select 0 or more options of a limited number of choice. So if we go to our Visual Studio Code here, so let's write few checkboxes here. So first of all, let's give our title here of checkboxes. So let's just call it vehicles, and below this let's write a new label for our checkbox. Let's just say car, and inside it let's write I have a car, and below this let's write the input element of type checkbox, and let's also provide it a name, and let's call it vehicle 1. So let's write vehicle 1, and let's also self close it, and also provide it an id attribute. So let's just say car, and let's just copy it for the another checkbox, and let's just say I have a, let's say, bike, and let's just change it from car to bike also, and do the same for here, and let's just say vehicle 2 as a name attribute. Then also let's just copy it for the another third checkbox, and let's just say I have a boat, and let's also change the attributes also. So boat, and let's also change the name to vehicle 3. So if we now save it and open the file in our browser here and refresh the page, you can see that our vehicles checkboxes is now represented in the web page. So we can now select any of them for our user form to submit the data, such as I have a boat, I have a bike, I have a car, or I have none of them, or I have all of them. So this was an example of checkboxes input type. Next, we have the input type color, which is used for input fields that should contain a color. So if we go to our Visual Studio Code here and let's write a PR element here, and just above the submit button also let's add a PR here, and inside it let's write our new label here, and let's just provide the core attribute as color, and we can close it and write inside it color, and below this let's write input type as color, and we can self close it. So if we now save it and open the file in the web browser here and refresh the page, we can now see that we can actually select a color as a form data. So we can now select any color of our choice for the user data and form. So this was an example of input type color attribute. Next, we have the input type date, which is used for input fields that should contain a date. So we go to our Visual Studio Code here and let's just define a new label here and define a for attribute with name as date, and let's also write the ID attribute of color because we not have provided it. So let's actually write color here, and let's write the date inside the label here, and below the label let's also write input type equals date, and let's also provide the id as date, and we can self close it. So if we now save and refresh our web page here, we can now see that we can actually select a date from the web browser to be used in the user form. So we can select any date from here and any year or month or day, feel free to choose any one of the date. Then we have the input type email, which is used for input fields that should contain an email address, and also applies some basic email address validation, such as it must contain an @ symbol. So if we go to our Visual Studio Code here and let's write a new label here, an attribute also for, let's write email, and let's write email as title case, then input actually it's label not lab. Let's actually correct my spelling here, and below this let's write our input type equals email, and we can also provide a placeholder to it just like the text field, and let's write enter your email address, and we can self close it and also add a PR element to introduce a line break here. Let's do the same for our date also. So if we now save and refresh our web page here, we can see that now we can provide an email here, and if we write an invalid email, let's just type abcgmail.com and we click on submit, we can see that there is a basic validation that says please include an @ symbol in the email address. So if we now add a @ symbol inside and let's click on submit, we can see that our form is submitted and our form is resetted. So this was an example of input type email. Next, we have the input type file, which defines a file select field and a browse button for selecting and uploading the file. So if we go to our Visual Studio Code here again and let's add a new label here and also add a PR element before it, and let's just define a new label here and let's just say select logo, and define a for attribute to our label, let's just also call it logo, and below it let's just define input type equals file, and then we can self close it and also define the id attribute of our input type file, and let's just also call it logo and also add the id attribute. Oh my god, I keep forgetting the id attribute on the input elements. Let's add email here, and if we now save it and open our file in the web browser and refresh the page, we can now see that our input type file is now visible and we can actually select a file from it. So let's just select my picture here, so it displays the title of our file here, and the file is now selected and ready to be processed to the server here by clicking the submit button. And there are many more input types in the HTML. You can find them online, and don't worry, you don't have to remember them all. Just take notes of them and practice them in your HTML web projects. This is the best way of learning. So if this video helped you in learning and understanding the HTML forms, form elements and input types, do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel and comment your curious questions. And also follow me on the Instagram. Link is in the description. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video. Bye bye.